Good evening, everybody. I'm Michael Ignatieff, Rector and President of Central European University. And over there is Marietje Schaake. She is a Dutch politician. She's been a member of the European Parliament since 2009. She's a member of D66, part of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe, ALDE, in the European Parliament. It's wonderful that she's here. It's wonderful to have a young European female politician talking about hope for Europe. Europe has been not just a project, not just a set of institutions, it has been hope incarnate for this continent really since 1945. The European dream has been a central way in which Europeans have expressed their hope for a world beyond war, a world of prosperity, a world of inclusion, a world of democracy. All these things have been encapsulated in the idea of Europe. And it's that set of hopes was created by a generation that came through the war, had suffered terribly through the war. And the question is whether that tradition of hope has been transmitted onwards through the present and into the future. And so that's why having someone of your generation is so important for this discussion. So we're delighted to have you here. Mariette is an extremely important spokesman and thinker in the European political scene on digital issues, and she's going to, I think, talk quite a lot about that. Let me just set before we hear from Mariette, let me just lay out a few things to say about Reasons for Hope, the series. It's called Reasons for Hope, and it's a series of presidential lectures that you should get your diaries out because we've got a lot of people coming that you need to know about in advance. We've got Kwame Anthony Appiah from NYU coming on March the 7th. We've got Ken Roth, the head of Human Rights Watch, and Marta Pardavi, who will be known to many of you as the director of the Helsinki Foundation, coming on the 12th of March. We've got Cass Sunstein coming from Harvard on the 21st of March. We've got Sir Martin Rees, Astronomer Royal, coming on the 4th of April. We got a lot of people coming. That's just the start. So make sure you check in with our website and put some of those dates in our calendar. What was the thinking behind Reasons for Hope? I think it came from a famous quotation of Václav Havel that many of you will know. I certainly have almost committed it to heart. It's a wonderful remark in which he said, hope is not the same thing as optimism. It's not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out. So there's a very strong sense of hope as a moral idea. And that connects to this idea of Europe. Europe was never just a piece of institutional machinery, it was a moral ideal. And so it's in that spirit that we'll be thinking about it in this series. CEU exists to put ideas under strain. There are no sacred cows here. There's no reason to be enamored or entranced by the European project as a project of hope. I hope by the end of the next 90 minutes we'll have given Europe a good pummeling and see what comes out on the other side. But right now, I'd like to welcome Marietje Schaake and thank her so much for coming and talk to us.
Good evening. Is this on? Yes? Good. It's really a pleasure, and what a list of speakers to stand between. It's really a shame I can't participate in all the next lecture series on Hope for Europe, because certainly we need it. But I really appreciate being here at Central European University. I always love exchanging views with people, and I always get inspiration from having critical assessments of what we put at the table and thinking about it together. So being here, especially now at Central European University, I think is a bit loaded for all of us who've been following the discussions about this very institution. And I just want to say before I start with my introductory remarks that I'm actually very sorry about the pressure that this university is under, about the need to move parts of the activities to Vienna. And I frankly wish that more European politicians would have spoken out much more forcefully against what is happening to this institution and, of course, to Hungary and the rule of law in this country. Now, at a time where there's not that much hope for optimism necessarily, I felt a bit challenged to speak about hope for Europe. And I'm going to quote Václav Havel in a slightly different way when he said, "The kind of hope that I often think about, I understand above all as a state of mind, not a state of the world." And so in that spirit, I'm going to share a few reflections on the state of freedom, which perhaps has become synonymous with the state of Europe. But certainly I want to touch a little bit on where we came from as Europeans and how the frontier of the struggle for freedom has moved to new places as well, the online world, among others. Because only when we understand clearly what is at stake, we can take action to protect the principles that need to be cherished. The veneer of civilization is paper thin, said Tom Lantos, a great Hungarian and a great Democrat as well. And coincidentally, my mother used to tell my brother, my sister, and I the exact same thing when we were young. Born not long after the liberation from Nazis and World War II, she grew up witnessing the painstaking work of restoring that veneer after it was scratched off and brutally broken, forever damaged by the Holocaust, hate, and hunger. Jan Wolkers, the Dutch author and artist, created a beautiful monument. It is a set of mirrors that lay on the ground and reflect in them the skies. The mirrors are broken, accompanied by the words, "The skies will never be the same. Never again, Auschwitz." And such reflections instilled in my parents' generation a deep appreciation for what freedom is and of what exclusion, scapegoating, and fascism can lead to. And they in turn instilled in me a great sense of responsibility, never to forget that freedom requires defending. Every day, not only at home, but wherever in the world people need support in their struggles for human rights. And the scars of World War II, Michael mentioned it, also ignited over half a century of rebuilding of homes, of lives and societies, but also the crafting of what became a world order, mechanisms for peaceful conflict resolution, international and economic cooperation, and more importantly, the establishment of minimum thresholds to safeguard human life and dignity, buffers against the return of history. The Geneva Convention, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the United Nations, World Bank, and the European Union. More freedoms for more people would go hand in hand with more prosperity, at least in Western Europe, because many Europeans were liberated much more recently of Soviet repression and of the wars in the former Yugoslav republics. Those scars are naturally more fresh, and the veneer may not have fully recovered of all that trauma. Now, newly out of university, when I was the age of some of the students that may go to school here, I enjoyed participating in a fellowship at the International Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. And in assessing the evidence of war crimes, I learned the fragility of civilization firsthand. War and barbarism emerged in Yugoslavia seemingly overnight. and reading the testimony of a man describing his torturer in great detail. 1 m, brown hair and a small scar on his chin. I wondered how, many years after being imprisoned in a concentration camp-like facility, this victim remembered such details. His testimony continued, and he said, "We played on the same soccer team before it all started." Neighbors turning against each other, a 2-hour flight from Amsterdam, or on the other side of the border from here in Hungary, in Europe. Usually violence does not emerge overnight, but it is built up with years of grievances polarizing, dehumanizing, and eroding rights and freedoms. I think we're still dealing with the unhealed wounds of that war, with the lack of a forceful European determination to end ethnic cleansing and violence on its borders, with the scars of tribalism being weaponized. And it's the return of tribalism that concerns me a great deal. Now, I understand the desire for comfort in familiar and safe communities as events close by or on the other side of the world impact our lives. But I reject the political promises of purity, nostalgic pictures of a romanticized past, and the downright exclusion of the unknown and the dismissing of others. As we have learned from history, such thinking can lead to group rhetoric that mislabels individuals and traps them in broad categories devoid of their own convictions and identities. And for liberals like myself, resisting tribalism also means to be intellectually rigorous in trying to understand the times we live in. And I think it has become popular, maybe too popular, to identify the exact historic era that today mirrors. History does not repeat itself, but it often rhymes, as Mark Twain famously said. People may seek security in historic comparisons, as today's events are confusing. But tuning the instruments of our time to a misplaced historic chord will lead to false relations. It leads to an unfound sense of certainty or inevitability that risks preventing us from making the choices we can and taking the actions we must. By comparing today to the 1930s, for example, and labeling opponents as populists or fascists too easily, we're not only intellectually lazy, but also strategically weak. Such frames allow political opponents, especially the ones who've never held political office, to deepen a narrative of exclusion and victimhood. It darkens the lines between us and them, and even may suggest that there are good and bad people. Now, you will not hear me suggesting that there are no ideas, ideologies, or political agendas that do not deserve the strongest of rebuttals, or even outright dismissals, like fascism or nationalism. But disagreeing in the strongest terms should not mean confining people to the likes of a basket of deplorables. Challenge ideologies, but listen to people and hear their concerns, especially those of political opponents, I would say, or adversaries, without condemning them or considering them to a category of enemies and thereby escalating the debate. I think more than anything, we need leadership to overcome the deep polarization that we see and to strengthen the political center. It's a place for cooperation and compromise that needs to be recognized as valuable in democracy instead of being hollowed out. So let's not be deterministic or defeatist, but focus on solutions that can remedy actual concerns. If you care about liberal democracy as the best veneer of civilization, then prevent the erosion of the space for dialogue, for discussion, and for truth-seeking. I think that space is under pressure, and in very, very specific ways today. Our public and political debate has moved beyond parliaments, newspapers, public squares, or government buildings, because people increasingly access information online and debate ideas on social media platforms. The digital world, in many ways, has become the new frontier for fundamental freedoms, not just here in Europe, but across the world. And the question is, what digitization does to fundamental rights and freedoms, and what it does for democracy. Sadly, democracy has not gone viral. Instead, social media have put polarization on steroids, and demagoguery appears in timelines and search results. The selling of advertisements is considered more important than assessing the impact of profit models and opaque algorithms on democracy. Systematically, nuanced or fact-based clips and links are demoted by algorithms, while conspiracy theories and clickbaits rise. Just a few weeks ago, people searching for information on Ruth Bader Ginsburg found conspiracies about the Supreme Court Justice's health, that it was prevailing in the first 10 links of YouTube hits. And many months after Euronews journalists debunked a misinformed video about Guy Verhofstadt last year, it still ranks highest on the platform search results with over 8 million views and counting. Not only outright falsehoods, but really the confusion as such about which information can and cannot be trusted risks that people simply check out. How many of you have heard people saying, "I don't watch the news anymore"? And such a lack of engagement and an erosion of trust in liberal democracy makes our political systems vulnerable to leaders who can mobilize small and vocal minorities while pretending that those represent all the people. So who is in charge of placing advertisements and coding algorithms, and who should be in charge of the effects of technology and social media companies on democracy? From foreign actors gaming and manipulating the system, to sensation selling and micro-targeted messages reaching vulnerable people, it is remarkable how everything in terms of rights and liberties that have been fought for so bitterly are privatized and forsaken. Democracy must never be for sale. But it's not science fiction. A week ago, the political consultant who has constructed the narrative of George Soros as a Jewish enemy, George Birnbaum, spoke for the first time in an interview with BuzzFeed. Birnbaum was born in the United States, where his family moved after fleeing Nazi Germany. His grandfather was shot by Nazis in front of his son. But for the sake of delivering electoral victories for his company's clients, including Viktor Orban, he used anti-Semitic themes in campaigns. Birnbaum said about his strategy to depict Soros as a Jewish puppet master, it wasn't an emotional thing, it was simply a means to an end. Soros was the perfect enemy. It was so obvious. It was the simplest of all products, you just had to pack and market it. So in a world where more money can buy more screen time, who does defend the public interest and the quality of the public debate? And how do we avoid tribalism, anti-Semitism, for appearing as normal and legitimate on our screens? Not only cynical political campaigners, but major technology companies themselves present new frontiers in the fight for democracy and freedom. And we need to decide now what we do not want to see disrupted by technology, and which principles must stand the test of time and innovations. To avoid technology from being used for profit and repression, first and foremost. The rule of law needs to apply in the online world just as it does in the offline world. Since the end of World War II, the European Union and the United States have been the guardians and advocates of a rules-based system. They are best positioned to credibly and effectively develop global rules for the open internet based on the rule of law. But there is still an enormous gap to be bridged between promise and practice, and it starts at home. Both European and American companies continue to export highly sophisticated surveillance systems to dictatorships. I learned about the deep impact of these digital arms on people's rights and liberties from victims themselves. In Iran, it was German-Finnish Nokia Siemens networks that came under fire after monitoring had been used to track demonstrators and drag them to prisons. The company then sold off the monitoring capacity over their mobile phone networks to a separate company. This so-called lawful intercept capability may have been developed with good intentions for German, Finnish, or other police services to monitor criminals, and only after obtaining a court order. Yet they were used, or maybe I should say abused, to spy on human rights defenders in countries where rights are not protected and courts are not independent. And once a backdoor is built into the technology, it can be opened regardless of the context in which that happened. And later, companies like the Italian hacking team or Aria SPA sold their systems to other dictatorships worldwide. I met with activists in Egypt who had raided a police station and found prints of their own communications, snooped and stored message by message, email by email. And it was then that they, and also I, realized that it was not only human rights defenders and activists who were empowered by their mobile phones, but also the regimes that they were challenging. Ben Ali used Tunisia as a sandbox of experimenting with surveillance systems, with the authorities not only spying on activists, but also changing the content of their emails in mid-air to compromise them. Sometimes millions of euros are spent on hacking the device of a single person, like journalist Ahmed Mansour in the United Arab Emirates. And without sophisticated hacking software made in the West, Jamal Khashoggi would not have been framed and murdered, and Saudi women's rights activists not imprisoned. Now, the main Arab uprisings may be over, but European, American, but also Israeli companies continue to sell surveillance systems to dictatorships and intelligence services. And perhaps we should not be surprised that dictators repress their populations, but we should be outraged. It is companies from our free societies that are selling them the tools to do so. And meanwhile, authoritarian governments are also developing their own ways to control people with the help of technology. A search for Tiananmen Square on a search engine in Beijing renders 0 results. A combination of artificial intelligence and human sensors are scanning social media constantly to adjust banned words and memes, also in private messages. And one of the main victims was Winnie the Pooh. The yellow bear is referenced by people in China instead of mentioning the name of President Xi Jinping to avoid being censored. Now, of course, it didn't take long before Winnie got banned from the Chinese internet. And as funny as this may sound, the implications of Chinese firewalls are actually dead serious. Because with an integration of data collection and the latest technologies, the Communist Party has created what is called a social credit system. Artificial intelligence, but also facial recognition software, are currently at a breakthrough moment, after which it will be nearly impossible to be anonymous ever again. In China, Black Mirror has become a reality. Already, people are traced in their everyday moves, earning social credit for desired behavior, while losing in the ranks when they cross a red light or fail to pay a loan in time. And the score amassed is not a game. It doesn't offer benefits, but it has real-world consequences. People with lower scores cannot travel as easily or have trouble qualifying to buy a house or taking out a loan. And in territories where the Uyghur minorities live, an integrated surveillance system is keeping an estimated 1 million people in modern slavery and labor camps. So any illusion of choice is replaced by nudging and social steering through these millions of data points collected on people. And I'm afraid that even the idea of democracy and freedom could soon be an illusion. As we speak, we are witnessing a global systems competition between open and closed, democratic and authoritarian governance with the help of technology. And it is essential that Europeans understand what is happening, that we develop ways to protect the quality of life of people, as more and more elements of life have some sort of a digital component. European lawmakers are beginning to push several initiatives to preserve the rule of law online. Net neutrality, but also the General Data Protection Regulation are cases in point. But we really are only scratching the surface. Considering how technology has changed the struggle for human rights globally, we need to verify that expression is free and anchored in law, and limitations are justified, not profit-driven. If political actors want to reach internet users on social media platforms, let it be transparent that it is a politician and not a friend bringing an issue to your attention. Transparency and oversight are essential for checks and balances, and it is high time that democratic governance models steer technology and not the other way around. I say this also with the European elections in May in mind. We cannot be vigilant enough to avoid that the use and abuse of technologies robs Europeans of their democratic rights. Some of the stories that I've shared with you today may seem to paint a bleak picture, but I'm hopeful that we can turn the tide. To know what to fight for, it is good to be aware of what we stand to lose. If hope as a state of mind is to have the power to change the state of the world, we must take action. Political actors may try to polarize and divide, and repressive regimes around the world may try to curtail the freedoms of many, be they online or offline. Such actions and developments place a special responsibility on us in Europe and in democracies at large, to cherish and defend the freedoms we've built up that can never be taken for granted. We must now make sure that they're also defended as technology disrupts everything, from the way we go on holiday to the way we move around, go on dates, and discuss politics and current affairs. The open internet and the protection of people's rights on it in many ways can be seen as an extension of the layer of veneer that determines the resilience of our civilization. By applying the rule of law, we can make it more robust and begin to rein in the abuse of power, whether commercial or authoritarian. It is vital that today's arenas where deliberation, dialogue, debate, and disagreement take place are not captured or manipulated. For without a pluralist debate and with deeper polarization, with filter bubbles full of conspiracies, people risk standing with their backs against each other without even knowing it. Now, I don't believe we're seeing a replica of the 1930s, but precisely because it is 2019 and our time presents unique challenges, let us find hope and inspiration in knowing that events are not inevitable and that each of us can rise to shape the world around us. Thank you.
Let's plunge right into the issue that you raised, which is how you bring the rule of law into the social media maelstrom. I mean, as you look at the regulatory options, one thought is the technology is moving so fast, is so sophisticated,
Yeah.
that regulators are always 25 years behind, as it were. European Parliament might introduce new regulations and it's irrelevant because Facebook or whatever will think up something faster. So that's one problem, and I wonder what you think about that. But then, more optimistically, if you think about applying the rule of law so that we get some order in this democratic debate, some order in the internet, some sense of respect for privacy, respect for civility, respect for facts, I'm still listening to a regulatory solution that I believe in. I just wonder whether you could take that part of what you were saying further.
Yes. So if we needed new regulation for all the technological developments, it would certainly be a problem. But I am convinced that a lot of the existing laws that we have offer a perfect basis. Mm-hmm. It is just about applying them. Mm-hmm. And so when we think about, for example, risks of discrimination happening through algorithms, because we have biases in our offline societies, they can creep in to the online world. For example, is it as easy for a woman or a man to get a job when CVs are scanned by algorithms? It turns out that Amazon, one of the most tech-savvy and biggest companies on the planet, had a bias built into its scanning of CVs that preferred men. Now, okay, it probably mirrors the world that we see offline.
That strikes me as a staggeringly dumb thing to do.
Yeah, but it took years before anyone found out.
All right.
Similarly, is it as easy for a person with a black skin color to offer or rent a room on a platform like Airbnb? Or, right. is it harder for them? Anyway, the point is that we have regulations against discrimination, but we just don't enforce them. And the same goes for fair competition, much more economic principle right. that is anchored in our laws. It's not always enforced. Freedom of expression, access to information, democratic rights. Mm-hmm. So what I think is a more viable path is to have the principles quite clearly articulated and then empower regulators to look at where these principles might be at stake. Similar to how competition law works now, fair competition, antitrust are defined, but the European Commission in this case, but also national regulators can demand information, companies are supposed to hand it over, they can investigate and then assess whether the principles are respected.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the European institutions that you know much better than I do have the kind of capacity, the capability to do this? You're saying principles of non-discrimination exist. There's a whole set of stuff we applied in another context. We can apply them in the digital world. Do we actually have the capacity to do so at a European level?
Not entirely, because there's a constant tension between what is authorized or legal to do on the national level and on the European level. So let me give you two examples. There's a lot of discussion now, perhaps you've read it in the news, about Chinese telecom operator Huawei and whether or not they are providing safe products and services to roll out 5G, the fifth generation of connectivity. And certain countries in the EU have done their assessments for national security concerns. They come out with caution. Other countries roll out the red carpet for this company. And you see a real friction between a single market, but national competence on national security. And so I think that this tension sometimes, particularly when it comes to technology, between national competence on national security and economic integration, are really challenging us in this moment in time. And the same can be said for a number of other areas, but where I see quick movement is in the whole question of electoral integrity, where, of course, disinformation, who is being targeted, but also the security of our democratic technologies, the technologies we use for voting or registering or aggregating the votes. Are they robust enough? Are they resilient enough? And I think that particularly after 2016 in the United States, there's more awareness of what is at stake. I don't think we can be fast enough, so I would never say the authorities are ready, the EU is ready, because it will also require cooperation between national and European
But
government.
just to follow up on that point, believe me, we're going to get to questions pretty quick, but I can't resist having a little go first. We've got European elections in late May. There are all kinds of external and internal actors with a powerful interest in distorting that European vote. What's your assessment of how secure the electoral systems for the election of the European Parliament are in May 2019?
I'm very worried about them. I've suggested a stress test, similar to what we've done with banks, because I think it is clearly in the public interest that people's democratic rights are respected, but political parties, you know this, they would much rather buy one more advertisement on television than invest in cybersecurity measures or updating their systems. Most political parties, at least in Europe, they're not very wealthy, and there's a lot at stake. But I think we talk perhaps too much about systems and resilience and authorities needing to take action. I also believe we need to empower people in their rights, and also to be proud that they don't want to be tricked to believe something that is not true, or to be misled in making up their minds about something as fundamental as who to vote for, whether it's by a foreign government or a commercial entity that wants to mislead to sell more ads and to make more money. I mean, I think we still have to bring back this sort of empowerment of individuals to also ask for better protection of their votes and their rights, and not just think in terms of systems and algorithms and deep fakes, the new generation of misleading technologies that can basically produce videos of people saying something as if it's real while it's not actually said by that person. So there's a lot going on, and we cannot be vigilant enough, but I would like to bring much more of the population in this process.
One more question for me, and then we'll go out. And it's a more personal question about you as a politician.
Yeah.
You're a politician in the 21st century digital space. When I was in the digital space myself, now it seems very long time ago.
Last year.
The digital world was a complete sewer. The digital environment encouraged disinhibition. People would say things about me that were kind of amazing, right? What's your experience as a European politician in the digital space in terms of abuse, disinhibited comment, a sense of, do you get the sense that I had that the digital space is wading through a sewer? And it's very difficult to know how to act as a politician in that space, and it's very discouraging to, for example, young women wanting to go into politics, that this is the world you're in.
Yeah, I recognize that. I see it too. I've had, death threats, very sexually insulting comments being made, suggestions I'd rather, be at service in the kitchen than in politics. So yes, I recognize some of that, and some of it is also particularly targeted at women.
Yeah.
But by and large, and I just got a message that I'd been on Twitter, for example, for 10 years this week. I also think it is a very rich place still, where you can be in direct contact with human rights defenders or journalists as they are on the ground, and where you can take the temperature of the debate. You just have to realize that it is a self-selecting group of people, both because you decide who you want to follow, and I choose to follow many. I think I follow around 20,000 people, so clearly I'm not keeping up with everything they're doing, but I enjoy and I find useful and even necessary to understand the tone. But looking at that, I do think that the tone has really soured, and you see people really trying to pick fights constantly and to provoke and to challenge. And so there is a bit more than average, I would say, sort of aggression and provocation happening on social media, where some people really, I think they lose the context of what is sort of acceptable and what isn't. And sometimes I reply to people And then it seems like maybe they're made aware again that there's an actual person also receiving their comments. So just anecdotally, one time I got into confrontation with the far right in my country, and I alleged something, they disagreed, and so because one particular blog wrote about me, so many people followed that as a cue for let's attack her. You see that a lot. There are people who have a lot of influence, and when one of them says we're going to go get him or her, they all come around and go. And then I decided I didn't just want to let this pass. I mean, people were saying, you must be the child of Nazis, this and that. Very, very harsh comments. Not on substance, obviously, because I'm happy to discuss on substance any moment of the day. So I decided to write a blog about it. Also to inform other people what comes your way when you engage in these kinds of discussions. And I decided to just send it directly back to all the people who had commented on me. Without any note, just to send it back. And to my own surprise, a handful of them came back and apologized. So there's an interesting dynamic where I think the screen also dehumanizes as such, where people lose sight of the fact that when you type a comment, there's actually someone on the other side. And this dehumanization in general, the depolarization, is something that I think we should not underestimate, but that we don't understand enough. Because we have no insight into how the algorithms of these big social media companies work. We have ideas because of incidents, conspiracy theories rising to the top, or things being uncovered, like the fact that Facebook paid teenagers $20 to get access to all their sensitive information on their phones. But it's piecemeal, and because of investigative journalists that we learn this, but we don't have systematic understanding of what the impact of business models steered by algorithms and data actually does to our public debate and democracy. And I think we owe it to ourselves to get that insight.
Yeah, you've led us, Mariette, into one of the ways to think about the question about reasons for hope in Europe. One of the things we might say after 45 minutes of listening to you is, if we want to be hopeful about European politics, right? We want to have rational grounds to have hope in the future of some kind of democracy in Europe. We better get regulatory control of the internet, right? I mean, would you agree that that's a kind of... Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think the public interest has been eroded by digitization, because digitization almost always means privatization. And so I don't believe in regulation as such, just as a goal in and of itself, but I think where we are now, the balance has tilted so much to these big companies that we really need to pull it back. And we should assess what is necessary to protect democratic rights and human rights and fundamental freedoms, and then do what it takes, whether it be regulation or engaging with these companies, which I think we can conclude is failing. There have been a lot of discussions with companies, and they've dismissed a lot of the concerns also that I raised. In 2016, I talked to Facebook and asked them, what are you doing to knowingly or unknowingly become an instrument in determining who is the next president of the United States? And their answer was, don't watch too many movies.
Right.
Yeah. So they never took our
That is to
concerns
say,
seriously.
you exaggerate our importance, is what they were trying to say. Was that?
Yeah, basically, and dismissed the concerns with, just very easy language, and look where we are today. And I still don't think Facebook has understood how serious things are. But that's just one example. So, we've given an opportunity to these companies to do the right thing. A lot of them have promised to do the right thing. It's with their slogans, Google's slogan, do no evil. But we must not just trust but verify. I think that's the point where we are. And so, yes, regulation is important, but especially enforcing the laws that we already have. Campaign finance. If you want to put an ad in a newspaper, the newspaper will identify that it's an advertisement. And when it's from a political party, you cannot say that it's not. So there are rules about messengers having to be identified. There are rules about what you can and cannot present to minors. There are rules about which personal data you can and cannot use. For example, I don't think, but it probably depends per country, that you can target communications on the basis of sexual orientation or religion. So there are a lot of safeguards that we simply have to decide to use. But I think the problem is the lack of understanding of what goes on in this black box of algorithms and business models, often designed and constantly changed far, far away from us, but having a deep impact, you know, in our own society. So the understanding is a challenge, I think, that explains the lack of action.